Well, good morning. I don't have any prepared remarks, but I understand a lot of you have some questions, so I'm here to answer your questions.
Yeah, after you.
Okay.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions about the Brian Miller case.
Okay.
Accused serial killer. This case is, the victims waited 22 years for him to get arrested, and now it's been 7 years since the arrest. It seems like the case has been delayed and delayed and delayed, and now it sounds like the defense is changing their strategy to not guilty by reason of insanity. Are you going to accept another delay in this case if they try to delay it again?
Well, it's not up to me to decide whether a delay or a continuance is accepted or not. It's up to the judge. My attorneys are extremely experienced. This is a very important case. It's a serious case. It's a death penalty. And if they feel like the continuance is warranted, then they may go along with it. If they feel like it is not warranted, then they will oppose. And I will leave that to their judgment.
Quick follow-up. It's a death penalty case. One of your predecessors made that decision. Is there any chance that death might be taken off the table at some point during these proceedings? He is being tried on 2 murder counts, but investigators believe there are other victims out there, and I know some of those victim family members wished that there was some kind of a deal that would require him to confess to what he did. Is that off the table?
At this point, it would be inappropriate for me to discuss any sort of settlement negotiations. But at this point, trial is set.
And one final question on this. There are an unbelievably high number of sealed documents in this case. I know that it's a high priority case and there's a lot of pressure. Now, it seems like the defense is going to not guilty by reason of insanity, their strategy. It's a bench trial, not going to taint a jury. Is there any way that the prosecutor's office would move to unseal any of these documents that have been sealed?
I'd have to look at the individual documents that you're talking about, and I have a great deal of respect for the court in this case, very knowledgeable judge, and I don't know who requested for them to be sealed, specific documents that is, and so at this point I think what's key is that the case proceed. As you pointed out, there are victims who have waited a very, very long time for resolution, and at that point then another look at those documents can be made afterwards.
County Attorney, I'm wondering what feedback you've gotten after that policy change. I believe last week it was involving, gun crimes in prison. What have you heard from either Valley Police Departments and then, let's say progressives who are, have been critical of that move?
From the police and actually from the public at large, I've received a lot of very positive feedback. I think people are tired of having their communities riddled with gun violence. In terms of the progressives, well, they're going to oppose anything that involves holding people like that accountable.
There's a lot of talk about violent crime, right? And when you zoom out and look back decades, there's debate on whether or not it's actually gotten worse. Your office has put out a number of, I think, press releases lately pointing out the number of homicide submittals you've gotten over a weekend. What's your assessment, being in this office for as long as you have been, of the state of violent crime in Maricopa County?
I think what we have seen since, I think there's a lot of factors that are playing into this, but I think what we have seen as a result of COVID, as a result of anytime there's a financial downturn, we see an increase in crimes. That happened back in 2007, and I saw that. In that area, I saw a lot of child abuse increase. You're also seeing failed policies of not supporting the police department. You're seeing failed policies of letting people out on no or low bail. And we're seeing the results of that, which is an increase in crime. And these are not theoretical statistics. From August 19th to August 29th, these are 16 dead bodies, 15 of them shot. And so something has to be done about this, and it's this office's and it's my responsibility to do that.
Your office is evaluating number of officer-involved shootings. Some of them go back a couple of years. Do you have any update on the status, how that progress is going? And then I'll ask you about the specific, the Melanie Duval case that took place 3 years ago, the shooting on US 60 in El Mirage, if you're aware of that case.
That's the federal
Yeah.
agency, yeah. So we have made significant strides in reducing the number of older backlog or older officer-involved shootings, and we're continuing to do that. We are meeting regularly. I see a value in getting through those to review them for all parties involved, and so we have significantly reduced the numbers. In terms of the older ones that you're, specifically the one you're referring to, which was a federal agency, there is a different process that affects those types of shootings. Those are reviewed by the Department of Justice first, looking at federal statutes, and we allow that process to go forward before we then start our own process of looking at whether there was a state statute violated. So those, by their very nature, are going to take a longer time.
Do you have any control over that? You said you allow it. I wonder if the federal agencies, the FBI task force in this case, if they consulted you on that.
Well, this is a process and a protocol that goes back prior to my administration, but it is important to do because they obviously have, these are their law enforcement agents, and they're doing a federal review that we would not have jurisdiction over. So I think it's appropriate to do that.
Can they both coincide at the same time, I guess?
I think it's very difficult, having been involved in police officer investigations over my career, to have multiple overlapping investigations going on at one time. For example, I've seen, where you have an internal and a criminal case, and I think the process of streamlining it and making that go first is probably the smartest way to do it.
You mentioned these are getting done faster. I was having a conversation with Tom before you walked in. Can you talk about, has anything changed with that process on how quickly, are you meeting more frequently? Do you have different teams? What's changed since your predecessor?
We are meeting more frequently. We've also taken a look at putting these in two different categories. There are some that are more going to require more review, more detailed review. There are some that are more clear-cut, and so those, while they're still going through a committee, they're still being looked at by civilians that work with us, and any person on that committee, including the civilians, can ask for the full review, and one person can trigger that, but that's allowed us to get through some very straightforward ones more quickly.
What's your goal with reviewing critical incidents or officer-involved shootings? It feels like when you clear 4, you probably get 4 more. Do you have kind of when you look on the horizon, this is where we'd like to be in terms of a backlog?
It's not so much a number goal, it's just an age goal. We don't want to have a completed submittal in our hands for a lengthy period of time and not reviewing it. So, I can't control the number coming in, but I can control how long we have them completed in front of us to look at.
I've got a follow-up question about the gun crimes and your efforts to combat gun violence. Having been a reporter for a while, knowing several police officers, a perennial frustration in the past has been that they submit multiple charges, and one of them is felon in possession. Mm-hmm. And during plea negotiations, that always gets dropped. Is that practice, I shouldn't say always, often, mm-hmm. Is that practice going to change under your stance, and what are your views on a police officer's point of view that if we tack on this felon in possession charge, the person's going to go away for a longer period of time?
Well, it really depends on what other charges are submitted. If it's if they submit, for example, an aggravated assault class 3 or a class 2, that's going to be the higher level felony. I wouldn't call it a practice, but the one thing that you should be aware of is that a number of years ago, there was a case that was handed down by our Court of Appeals that and I believe the Supreme Court, that said that misconduct involving weapons charges, which is what you're talking about, have to be severed from the body of the other case. And so what you're seeing probably is the fact that they know that these charges are going to trial first, and this case is going to be a completely separate matter. So that might be affecting some of that. But under the policy, the bottom line is if you are a felon in possession of a gun, you're going to prison, because we're seeing a correlation between that and other crime.
Do you agree with that ruling that severs the cases when there's a felon in possession?
I understand the reason for it.
I apologize.
Good morning.
So my producers would like to know the status of, I don't even have his name, but there was a incident that was caught on camera in Gilbert. You know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about? And Gilbert Police said they forwarded it to your office.
Yes, that's Bernardo Aillon, Aillon, and that has been submitted to our office on August the 22nd, and it's under review currently by our office.
I'll circle back quickly. This is my
Okay.
last question. You know, Morgan mentioned delays in cases, and we've noticed a number of high-profile murder cases continuing to be pushed, right? Whether it's 2017 and on, now looking at 2024 trials. I've talked to family members who said, generally, they feel like the justice system is dragging them along and letting them down. Why do these cases take so long, and what can your office do, if anything, to try and get them to trial faster for the defendants, the victims, et cetera?
You know, that's got to be incredibly frustrating for family members, and I've talked to them myself over the years, to wait for justice. But the reality is every case is different. If you want to know about a specific case, why it's being continued, you'd have to look at, especially if it's ongoing, I'm not going to be able to comment on it, but you could look at the minute entries to determine who asked for the continuance and what the basis was. And as I was talking earlier, when the defense files a motion to continue, the prosecutor has to evaluate the need for that continuance as well as the judge. And if it's going to be something that is going to interfere with the case, if the continuance is not granted, the prosecutor may agree to it. But in situations where it is not necessary to the preparation of the case, I expect the prosecutors to be objecting to those continuances because of the same thing you're saying, which is what the victims are going through.
And you've been upfront with the staffing shortages in this office. Does that play a factor in, you know, whether it's their caseload not being able to handle everything and needing motions? Do you find that that's happening?
I think a lot of what you're seeing is there was a huge backlog. I mean, the courts did a great job of continuing to go on during COVID, but there was just a necessary, because of the lack of jurors, there was a slowing down of the system, and now there's a catching up of the system. And so you add that to the fact that, yes, we had some numbers drop, that we're building back up very successfully. It's going to slow things down a little bit, but we're taking great strides in that area, and so we should be up to, I believe our estimate is that we will be under 10% deficit of prosecutors by the end of November, which corresponds with when bar results come out and swearing-in ceremonies happen.
I apologize if this was already asked, but in reference to the mandated prison gun policy, is there a number or an approximate number of how many people accepted plea deals, like in the last year or two maybe, instead of going to prison?
I could give you just general information about that. Obviously, the vast majority of cases result in pleas, but specific to the gun policy, no, I couldn't tell you. This does not prohibit pleas, but it does require the plea to stipulate to prison.
Real quick, do you know the percentage of cases that end up pleading out versus going to trial?
I mean, it's in the upper 90%, but off the top of my head, I couldn't give you an exact number.
And just to clarify, the plea deal under the new policy would have to include prison time?
Yes.
Okay. Where that wasn't a requirement before in the plea deal?
It was a presumption You'd have to look at the way our policies are worded. It was a presumption, but the individual attorney could deviate from that. This now makes it a mandatory prison stipulation, and it has to go up to senior management to deviate from that. It also sweeps in what we were talking about earlier, the mandatory prison for felons in possession of a firearm.
Do we have an approximate number of people or cases that this new policy will affect?
People are, no, I don't.
Okay.
I'm hoping the number drops.
Well, yeah, I know, that's why I wanted to be able to have a number now, and then we can compare it later.
Mhm.
All right, any other questions?
Did you have any questions?
Yeah, I was wondering about fentanyl here in the valley.
Uh-huh.
We know that the number of fentanyl.
Do you want to take a minute to set up?
Yeah.
Okay, sure, we'll wait. That's no problem.
She's gonna be a minute, if you wanna just hit pause.
Well, does Telemundo have access to pool?
What was that?
In your newsroom?
I'm with Telemundo. Yeah. I don't think I have access. Yes.
Carla, can you call the newsroom and see if they've got access to pool? I mean, keep sitting up, but.
Yeah.
I'm still rolling, so.
We'll clip
Thank
it,
you,
we'll
Marty.
clip it and give it to you if you want. You just want it on this camera.
Yeah, that's
I'll make
fine.
sure that happens.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
okay, we're filming it too,
Yeah,
so.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Go ahead and ask your
Sounds
question and
good,
we'll get
thank
you the
you.
video.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so we were wondering about the fentanyl, amount of fentanyl here in the valley. We know it's rising, and we were wondering what the county is doing to combat this, or what is the plan to, lower this amount of drugs in the
Mhm.
county.
Yes, the amount of fentanyl that is coming over the border is terribly frightening. As you well know, a single pill could addict somebody, a single pill could be death for somebody because it's so unregulated. But we're taking different approaches depending on whether the person is an addict or the person is an addict dealer, so they're dealing low amounts to support their habit, or if this person is truly a dealer. In the situation where the person has an addiction issue, we have a very effective program here for diversion, where people can go through a very stringent number of classes and training, so to hopefully get them off of fentanyl so that they can resume their place in society, have a job, etc. For people who are the serious drug dealers, we are pursuing prison time for them. I have an entire unit dedicated to looking at those cases where people are smuggling drugs and selling drugs in large quantities, and we are taking those very seriously. This is just, it's killing so many people, this fentanyl crisis. And now, we have, I would ask you to tell your listeners the parents talk to their kids about not taking anything from someone, even if it looks like it's just candy.
And how much are you seeing fentanyl drive other crime, whether it be property crime, et cetera?
Drugs are always a large part, whether it's fentanyl or meth or cocaine or heroin, are always a large part of certainly property crimes and often in crimes of violence.
You're gonna be doing a parent forum on September 27th, maybe, it's at Independent High School.
Mhm.
Maybe let folks know about that.
Yeah, so what time is that?
It's from 6 to 7.
6 to 7. So we'll be at Independence High School. It's a forum. I'll be sort of moderating it, but we'll have a number of experts, including prosecutors, police, to talk about this fentanyl crisis to parents. And it's from 6 to 7, September 27th, and so please come.